Imagine that you live next door to a single mother and a 5-year-old son. Every morning you see her leave for work but realise the child is being left at home by himself. How do you think the child feels being left all alone every day? What kind of danger is he in? Or imagine you suddenly see a pregnant woman running out of her house crying in the middle of the winter with no coat or even shoes. What do you think might be happening? And what can you do? Or how would you react if you were a council worker on a visit to support a housing tenant? You discover a disturbing scene of self-neglect and clear signs of mental illness. All throughout Haringey, there are people in trouble. Children and adults who are vulnerable and living in conditions or experiencing situations where they are in danger of harm and abuse. But you can help to make them safer. These films will show you how. All of these stories and people are real, and so are the opportunities for you to make a difference. Safeguarding is protecting children and adults at risk from harm and abuse. It's about promoting their welfare. People don't always know they're being abused, so we all have the opportunity to help and protect them. How do we safeguard children and adults? By paying attention to signs of abuse and telling someone about it. Watch this true story about safeguarding. Think about how you would react in this situation and what you could do to make a difference.
I went out on a home visit one day, myself and a colleague, to talk to the tenant about rent arrears and their benefits. And on getting there, knocked on the door, child answered the door from the inside, didn't open the door, and asked who it was. I said I was from the council, needed to speak to their mother. He said, well, my mum's not here. And I instantly realised, okay, this child I was talking to couldn't have been more than 5-6 years old. Chatting with us very freely through the letterbox. At first he said she'd popped out to the shops, and then we said okay, we'll wait until she came back. Half an hour later she still wasn't back. At this point we started to get a bit concerned. When I realised that the child was on their own, I was anxious, worried. The neighbour confirmed that the parent, they were a single mother, often left the child to go to work, so she would leave the child on their own. I had to contact my manager, who then contacted social services, but yes, social services came in and took over the situation. It could have happened on a different occasion where the child could have come to harm, because anything could happen. That is neglect.
If you see a situation where a person or a child is in danger of harm or abuse, acting quickly can have a major impact. In our story of the child being left at home alone, imagine what would happen if the council worker hadn't reported it. Something bad could have happened to that child, or the mother who is struggling to cope might fall into more trouble. But the council worker did report it. That means the child can be kept safe, and the mother can get the support she needs. Had someone noticed and reported this even earlier, for example the neighbours, they may have gotten the support they needed even sooner. Think about this story about safeguarding. Mr. Smith is an elderly gentleman that attends the local post office every Monday, uses a Cashpoint card, takes out £20 and buys his groceries. He knows all the people in the counters. They say hello, Mr. Smith. He tells them about their day, what he's about to do. One occasion, Mr. Smith doesn't come in, but another gentleman comes in with his card and has the pin, so he's using the pin. The post office staff query this, and he says he's a relative of Mr. Smith. Ordinarily, Mr. Smith uses £20 to do his shopping. This gentleman's taken out 50. There's concerns. The post office staff, they contact the safeguarding team because of the concerns they have. We look into it, and it transpires that this gentleman, he's claiming to be a carer for Mr. Smith. Once the local authority started their inquiries, this gentleman disappeared. The local authority put in steps to ensure that they would safeguard his finances. The local authority gives Mr. Smith his weekly money, so he's able to go and do his shopping as he used to do. If you live or work in the borough, you have an opportunity to help protect our most vulnerable people, simply by keeping your eyes open, using your instincts and telling someone about it. In all of these films, you see more true stories that show the different forms that abuse can take, what to look out for, what to do about it, and just how much of a difference it can make to someone's life. So far, you've seen a few examples of abuse and how safeguarding can protect people. But what do we mean specifically when we talk about abuse? Abuse is an action or lack of action on the part of another person that causes harm. It can be intentional or unintentional. The 2014 CARE Act includes several types of abuse that are important to understand and learn how to identify. For example, physical abuse could be hitting, pushing or pulling of a vulnerable person. Listen to this example and imagine how it would feel to be physically abused.
My name is Charlotte. I've got cerebral palsy. About 4 years ago, when I moved out of my parents' house to live independently, I was in an accommodation in Tottenham, which was a supported living. Me and another service user didn't get along, and it got quite physical. The person in question, he got quite violent with me, and he tried to throw me down the stairs. Obviously, I screamed for my life, and that's when a member of staff managed to pull us apart, and then she called the police. Luckily, there was no broken bones or anything. If it wasn't for that particular member of staff, I don't think I would be here today.
Other types of abuse covered in the CARE Act include sexual abuse, psychological or emotional abuse, and financial or material abuse, like in the story of Mr. Smith and the post office from the first film. But all of those forms of abuse can happen in the most intimate of settings, the family home. Domestic violence is defined as coercive and controlling behaviour in intimate and familial relationships. And sadly, as a result, is often witnessed by children. So spotting signs of domestic violence and reporting them quickly can be really important for minimising danger to entire families.
My name is Eylem. I work for Haringey Council as a specialist domestic abuse practitioner. A member of public saw this woman. She was pregnant, actually heavily pregnant, in distress. She just fled to the street. She just escaped from home, bare feet and even no coat in the middle of winter actually, because she was quite scared and crying. They called the police then took her to the hospital because she was heavily pregnant and in distress, and then they made a referral to social services, and that's how it came to my attention. So I started providing support to this woman. Abuse and domestic violence is, I think, all of our responsibility. So it's not just the police or social services. In this case, of course, there's a child, so they had to make a referral to social services, and then the woman started to get all the support that she needed to be able to safeguard her child and herself.
Other types of abuse covered in the CARE Act include neglect, self-neglect, discriminatory abuse, which is using someone's race, ethnicity or sexual identity against them. Organisational abuse, for example, might be a care home or other institution intentionally causing harm or withholding care from a vulnerable person. Many of these forms of abuse can be easy to notice and identify, but one type is much more hidden and difficult to see than others, even though it's happening all around us in cities, towns and villages throughout the UK. Modern slavery, which includes human trafficking, sexual exploitation and forced labour, happens everywhere. That's why it's important for all of us to learn how to identify it.
My name's Tim. I work in a safe house with female victims of human trafficking. I think the modern slavery surrounds us. From when we get up in the morning to when we leave our house to when we arrive to our destination, we've almost certainly walked past properties where exploitation is occurring. A young lady who was born in Vietnam. Her parents died when she was young. About the age of 10, she was effectively sold and taken to a factory somewhere just inside Russia. She ended up staying there, she reckoned, for possibly something like 7 to 8 years. They threatened her and said that if she tried to run away, they would track her down, kill her. One day, a group of men came into the factory. They were masked men, and they chose about 15 or 20 people that they wanted to travel to the UK. Long journey, no windows in the truck. So at that point, she was given notice that she would need to go and work in the nail salon. And this is not a unique situation. There are people working in nail salons in all of our high streets, in all of our towns, and there are people accessing services in these nail salons and in these towns. Manicures, and they're having their nails filed, and any of the customers in the shop could look at her and think something was amiss, could have noticed that something wasn't quite right, but failed to do that. In this particular case, police came into the nail parlour on a search, on a routine visit, and it was at that point that she was detected as a victim of trafficking and that she was able to come out and then subsequently received the attention that she needed. She's very well now. She was with us for an extended period of time. We needed to provide a little bit more support due to her vulnerability, intense English language learning, lots of English lessons, and we were able to assist her to move forward.
These and other stories show what a huge impact abuse can have on people's lives, how abuse can make vulnerable people feel helpless, afraid and alone, and how you can play a crucial part in giving them a chance to get help. In our next film, you'll hear some more stories that show examples of people just like you that noticed abuse and took action, which made a big difference. Safeguarding is a power that each of us have, that we can use to prevent and stop abuse in all corners of the borough. Parks, schools, shops, everywhere. All we need to do to activate that power is to pay attention. Notice when something is wrong and tell someone about it. That's especially important when it comes to protecting children.
Our PE teacher is teaching his class one day and he observed that a 6-year-old boy had a bruise on his left arm. Looks fresh as well, like it just happened recently. The PE teacher asked the boy what happened and he said, "My mum whipped me with a ruler." But his mum asked him not to say anything to anybody because if he tells the teacher or anybody, he'll be taken away. The PE teacher felt that this is not something that was right and will contact the child protection leader of the school. The child protection lead and the PE teacher was of the view that this needs to be reported to the children's services, which they did. Mom denied it and said, "Oh, he fell over and had a bruise." I looked at Mom and said, "You need to be honest with me because we'll put support in place for you. We can take you for parenting classes and how to positively discipline your child as opposed to hitting your child." Because the PE teacher took action, we were able to safeguard this child and let Mum be aware that there are different ways of disciplining the child. She went through the parenting classes and she learned a lot. And this child is happy at home.
A simple action from the PE teacher in this story transformed this young boy's life. That's what the power of safeguarding children can do. A child is defined as anyone who hasn't yet reached their 18th birthday. Children can be vulnerable to neglect and abuse from anyone they come across in their daily lives, including their own families. The rise of the internet and social media has opened up even more ways for children to be accessed and abused. So it's important to be even more vigilant than ever before for signs of abuse in different forms, including physical, sexual or emotional abuse, neglect, online abuse or cyberbullying, sexual exploitation, or the influence of extremism leading to radicalization. Listen to these real stories and try to use your knowledge, instinct, and what you've learned so far to spot the danger. Try to think about your day-to-day life. Would you notice these kinds of things? And would you tell someone about it?
A woman started noticing a group of girls visiting a neighbor's house. These girls were aged around 13 to 16. They had their school uniform on, and at the time that they visit this property, it should be the time that should be in school. And the neighbor became concerned because their property was owned by a man, an older man, and she also observed other men too and boys going in and out of the property, and there's a strong smell of weed coming out of that property. She made a referral, and I went in to investigate to see what was going on. I spoke to my manager about this and there were concerns that this guy is known by the police. We made contact with the school and it turned out these girls have been missing school for months. We made contact with the parents, which they were happy about because they had no knowledge that the girls have not been going to school. Through my investigations, I discovered that the young girls were being groomed for sexual exploitations. The neighbour acted swiftly. She took the right action by alerting the social services. If she hadn't done that, this sexual exploitation would have gone on for months. After the investigation and we had our evidence, this man was arrested while the girls were given the good support that they needed. The girls are doing well now. So it was thanks to the neighbour that made the referral. Otherwise, these children would have been in danger.
Imagine you were the neighbour in that story. Would you tell someone about it? That decision could steer those girls away from a very dark future. What a difference you could make.
There was a young lad, approximately 14 years old, and while at school his behaviour had changed, and this is identified by the teacher. And what they'd realised is that he was becoming far more aggressive. It was also identified by other pupils who brought it to the attention of the teacher that he had been sharing online extremist, right-wing extremist material with other kids in the school who actually found it quite offensive. The teacher quite rightly made a referral. That referral went to the local authority. What that exposed was a mother who was having difficulty at home with not just the 14-year-old boy but his older brother, who had a very strong sense of right-wing politics. So one of the key things here was that the teacher identified something, they saw something and they reported it. And as a result of that, the family got the support that they required. Had that referral never gone in, the potential consequences where a 14-year-old lad may have been set on a path of extremism which could have taken him into a life of criminality. But that didn't happen. That was averted because the vulnerability was identified and the appropriate safeguarding was put in place, which helped him, his family, his mother and his brother.
Using your powers of safeguarding is important and can change people's lives. But what should you be looking out for? After watching our first few films, you've learned about many different forms of abuse. But how do you spot these dangers? What should you be looking for? What are the signs that tell you to take action? Some signs of abuse are obvious. In the story of the crying pregnant woman running in the street, it was clear something was wrong. But often signs of abuse can be hidden or subtle. The most powerful tool we have for noticing hidden abuse is our instincts. Sometimes we see something that just doesn't feel right. That's a feeling worth paying attention to. This gentleman, young gentleman, he lives within a housing association. He lives on his own. He's got learning difficulties. Because he's considered vulnerable, the neighbours have taken it upon themselves, just to look out for him. They notice that normally this gentleman has visitors who have name badges. They'll say hello. They might stop and say how are things in terms of what's happening on the road. Over the last few weeks, the neighbours notice people coming into his address who wouldn't necessarily be visiting him, younger than him in age. They weren't wearing local authority badges. These people weren't saying hello, they were keeping their heads down. They had hoodies on, baseball caps, unkempt in terms of their dress. One of the neighbours had a gut feeling that something wasn't right, so they felt compelled to notify the local authority in the form of raising a safeguarding alert. We look into it. We find that the property's been taken over by drug dealers. So we contact the police, we contact housing, and through those agencies we get the alleged perpetrators moved on, and he now continues to live there but with extra support coming in just to keep an eye on things. The neighbour in the story uses their instincts to identify danger for the learning disabled man next door. But apart from instincts, there are other signs and indicators that can make it easier to spot abuse. For example, bruising, cuts, burns and other injuries might be a sign of physical abuse, but they could also be due to an accident. So how do we tell the difference? There are parts of the body where accidental injuries occur more often, but injuries in other areas of the body might be a sign of abuse. In the story of the boy in the PE class, it might have been easy for the teacher to assume that the bruise on the boy's arm was accidental, but the location of the bruise on the boy's forearm was a sign that the teacher wisely noticed, signalling the possibility of abuse. But other forms of abuse all have their own possible signs and indicators. Sudden, significant changes in appearance, behaviour or mood might be a sign of abuse. For example, if a normally happy person suddenly seems frequently depressed or angry, a sudden change in finance, debt or spending habits could be a sign of financial abuse. Inappropriately sexualized conduct or conversation, especially in younger people, could be a signal that some form of sexual abuse is going on. If a vulnerable person often seems hungry, cold, unkempt or unclean, this could be a sign of neglect. or in the case of vulnerable adults living alone, self-neglect.
I went to visit a tenant, got to the door and he wouldn't let us in. We then insisted that we took it indoors, which he was very reluctant about, but eventually allowed me to come into his living room. From the point when he opened the door wouldn't open because he had newspapers everywhere. Everywhere. He had bundles and bundles of newspapers everywhere you looked. The place was filthy. His kitchen was dirty. Just no surface to do anything on. It was manky. There was a smell as well. It was pungent. When you walked into his living room, everywhere was covered with stuff. There was boxes, there was newspapers. I saw this open fireplace, which if it was lit with all these newspapers would be a complete health and safety hazard, not just to himself, but he lived in a block as well, a block of flats, which was also a double health and safety issue. So it was obviously a safeguarding issue. So after I left the house, I had a senior manager come out to meet me at the flat, and then we did the referrals to the relevant departments. Social services became involved as well to support him with that side of things. He eventually got moved into another property while his property was cleared up, and then he moved back.
Some signs of abuse are clear where others aren't. That's why it's important for all of us to use our eyes, ears and instincts in order to help vulnerable people who may be at risk. But once you've identified possible abuse, what should you do? Our next film will tell you exactly how to take action when you suspect that someone may. Imagine how much safer vulnerable people would be in Haringey if everyone in the borough was protecting them. By now you've learned that safeguarding is something we can all do. And simply by looking out for abuse and reporting it, you're hoping to save people from harm. But how should you report it? What should you do when you spot abuse? Firstly, remember, when reporting any possible abuse, you don't have to provide your name if you wish to remain anonymous. You'll simply be asked to provide as much detail as possible about your concerns. This will help us find the best way to support the person you're worried about. If you've witnessed abuse or suspect possible abuse, there are very specific steps you should take depending on what's happening. Most importantly, if it's an emergency where someone is in immediate danger or needs urgent medical attention, ring 999. If what you're witnessing isn't an emergency, but you think a crime has happened, then phone the police on the non-emergency contact number 101. No matter what, make sure that you've done everything possible to keep yourself, the child or adult in danger and other people safe. But as you've learned throughout these films, the most important thing you should do if you've seen or suspect abuse is to tell someone about it. If you're working with the council or any company in the borough, tell your line manager. Or if that's not possible, tell your manager's manager. And if that's not possible, or you're a member of the public, or if you're a volunteer, contact social services directly, which you can do by ringing any of these numbers during office hours. Or if it's out of office hours, including the weekend, ring 0208 489 0000. After you've made sure to deal with emergencies, possible crimes, or reporting the suspected abuse to someone, it's important to make a record of it by writing down what you've seen, heard, and what you've done. Send an email to yourself, or simply write it down in a journal with details, dates, and times. But just as important as knowing what to do when you've spotted abuse is knowing what not to do. Don't probe or ask leading questions. Just let people tell you their stories and make sure you're clear on what they're trying to say, nothing more. Don't stop them from talking. It's hard for victims to say something. So if they decide to talk, it's important to hear everything they want to tell. Don't destroy evidence. Interfering with anything on the scene of an incident could harm an investigation. Don't discuss the matter with anyone other than your manager, social services, the police, or the emergency services. Don't delay. From all of our stories, it's quite clear that acting quickly and early can have a huge impact. In some cases, it can mean the difference between life and death. Don't promise to keep secrets. Victims may be worried about talking, but assure them that you'll only pass on the information to people that need to know and that can help. If a person chooses to tell you about being abused, try to stay calm, be sympathetic and reassuring. and keep a record of what's happened and what's been said. Many of us in our lives have a deep desire to make more of a difference in the world, to do good, and to help other people. Safeguarding is a very simple, real, and enormously effective way to do just that. Think of all the people in our stories who positively changed other people's lives simply by paying attention, noticing abuse, and reporting it. All the people in our stories who helped safeguard others, change the lives of vulnerable people and stopped abuse from happening. You can be just like them. You can help to protect and save vulnerable people